What is it that bestows upon a nation the moral authority to govern using force? How does this differ from the governance of violent gangs? In simpler terms, what makes state power legitimate? Legitimacy is based on social agreements that respect state power for common good. As the U.S. Declaration of Independence says, a legitimate state relies on the consent of the governed. Few express this consent, hence social contract theory often discusses. The theory implies consent, but neglect or implied consent is complex. Another way to develop social contract theory is to shift from actual consent, whether explicit or implied, to what is called hypothetical consent. Essentially, hypothetical consent means that as long as you have, in general, people have the right to treat you in ways they believe you would consent to, even if you haven't explicitly permitted them to do so. For example, if you order sandwiches for every person in the office, you know your friend Xiao Hong always chooses whole grain sandwiches, so you usually order this type for him directly, without asking. You won't have to ask him alone anymore. When the sandwich arrives, he will thank you for choosing what he likes. If you had asked him first, he would have picked the same sandwich. So we think you are ordering the sandwich for him, assuming he agrees. If the country could know exactly which laws we would accept in the right context, then those laws would be based on our assumed agreement. Of course, our legal rights differ. Different people may prefer different sandwiches. Everyone has their own tastes. However, everyone must live under the same laws. Therefore, to ensure a law is valid in this situation, the state must obtain everyone's hypothetical consent. How can this be accomplished? One way is to think about what a rational person would agree to in terms of laws. For example, reflect on the principle of avoiding self-contradiction. Even if you haven't considered this before, I believe you would agree. If someone points out contradictions in your statements, you would generally see it as a reasonable critique that needs a response. You would also criticize others for the same reasons. Why am I so sure? Because I think you are rational and avoid contradictions. This is part of being rational. Rational people can disagree on many things. For instance, you might prefer pickled beets over cucumber sandwiches, while your friend Xiao Hong thinks otherwise. Nevertheless, despite your disagreements, both of you and your opinions are reasonable to some degree, even if you think the other is ultimately incorrect or entirely mistaken. You both agree that if someone does not like cucumbers or pickled vegetables, they should not be compelled to eat them. Many disagreements stem from a shared understanding of what is rational. Public rationality means a policy must meet rational standards for all affected, even with differing opinions. No one should be punished before a guilty verdict. This is a principle all rational people accept. No matter their other disagreements. If someone is still uncertain, many reasons can assist them in reaching certainty, which can be fully achieved through public rationality. Now, let's combine these thoughts. The logical flow is as follows. A hypothetical agreement meets the legal requirement for consent from those governed. Secondly, if a law is passed, thus, it acquires the assumed agreement of everyone impacted by it. Therefore, if a law is recognized as valid through public reasoning, it obtains the consent needed to be lawful. Certainly, you may object to the second premise, doubting if our so-called presumed consent is sufficient to establish legitimate authority. Even if someone knows what type of sandwich you prefer, if they decide without asking, you still have the right to say no. Also, applying a universal standard of reason to significant moral and religious disagreements may not be tenable. For instance, how do we manage a religious claim that says all other religions are unreasonable? Despite these doubts, public reason appears to be a strong foundation for justifying state authority. If all rational people agree on a viewpoint, how can you oppose it? How can you oppose this viewpoint? Finally, what are your thoughts on this?